Switch trying to beat a boss in Zelda. That's how geeky I am. By the way, just in case, if you haven't yet, when we talk about a seamless, brilliant media immersion experience, the Nintendo Switch and Zelda. I'm just saying. One of the best media experiences I've had in recent years is that game and that system. It's amazing. I wanted to, we're going to wrap this morning. We're going to focus a little bit more on content. We've been hearing about branded content. We heard a good deal about it on the video panel yesterday, but we're going to drill a little bit more into the models, the business models around content today. But before we do, I wanted to make sure that we thank all of our sponsors. I mentioned yesterday that when they sponsor a MediaPost event, they know that they're sponsoring independent journalism, and we really appreciate that and their support. Their growing support for this event. We're 5 editions into the Publishing Summit, and our sponsor support keeps growing. For Inhabit, LiveRamp, and PostUp, thanks very much. But to everyone else, Live Intent, PulsePoint, Traverse, Yahoo for Publishers, ZergNet, True Anthem, SocialFlow, Nativo, and Realtime. You guys appreciate more than anybody how important these guys are to keeping this show going, and we really appreciate that. Also, we're, as I mentioned, this show really is generated, and these series of Insider Summits really are generated by the attendees, by the VIPs that we recruit, and I consult with all of you in coming up with ideas, the things we need to talk about next, the innovations that really are top of mind that people want to talk about. So we rely on you, and in fact, later this morning, I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues Eric Sass and Ross Fadner in a minute after our keynote. And we're not only going to talk about branded content, but then we're also going to have a session that reflects on some of the learnings of the last couple of days. And I want you guys to think about this because we're going to turn it out to you. We're going to ask you to reflect on especially the things that you've heard in the roundtables that were of special interest to you, and also key themes that we might consider as we go forward and program the Austin Summit. But we want to start with an old friend of this summit. In fact, I think, Eric, this is your third Publisher Summit. Eric Myers has been here before and presented before. One of the cool things we like about Eric is that his team at Cox goes absolutely nuts with the slides. So it's always a visual treat to have Eric. But Eric has presented before, especially about the ways in which Cox has been transforming over the years. He's spoken before, especially about the programmatic part of the business. Today he's going to, but not only talk about how programmatic is fitting into the larger picture, but focus especially on their branded content and their content studio and the ways in which infrastructurally they've had to change accordingly. Eric is the multi-market vice president of sales at Cox Media Group. He oversees ad sales for the Austin, Atlanta, West Palm Beach, and Dayton region, so he's driving here a lot. And before that, he was VP of advertising at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Please welcome back Eric Myers.
My creative team's really cool, and so I've got a lot of pretty, not much substance, so I figured that'd be good for the final morning. One of the things that he talked about in the whole conversation around Google and Facebook for us as an organization is we have to focus on local. We're not a national player, we're a local player. And that's the only kind of turf we can defend. We have big local market brands. They tend to be the largest single sites in any marketplace. And we are completely converging from a radio, TV, and newspaper organization to obviously a digital first organization, just like McClatchy and just like Meredith and other speakers that were up here. So similar situation. One of the things that our organization did, which I kind of questioned it, and then I ended up being the person that took the role, and that was to get rid of our traditional model, meaning no more publishers or GMs at large properties, but rather the group that I have, those properties represent about 2,100 people, and it's me and 2 counterparts that run all of that from a centralized and functional location. Not really corporate, because they actually report to us and we run those P&Ls. So what that means is you have an advertising person, a content person, and an audience person. It allows us to be quite agile. And the 3 of us can make a decision on the fly to partner with someone differently, to change the look of our homepage, to launch an app for a sports team in Austin because Texas people are crazy about football. So we launched Hook'em. And Hook'em pays very close attention to how people are reading digital media today, and we can move quickly. And it's not this large, myopic argument with a publisher in a local marketplace that may have different ideas from what maybe an audience lead who might know that space a little bit more. So that functional leadership's helped a lot with what I'll talk about today. So, okay, the pirate theme, I just have to point out, as soon as I told my creative team that we were coming here, they then researched, called me back within a couple hours, pointed out the Amelia Island is the pirate coast. The reason Amelia Island was famous for pirates is because you could get a boat very close, very deep waters, and then a protected safe harbor on the back end, great to hide people and treasure. And so thus the pirate theme. Now, we talk about the big national players. Obviously, they're bigger than us, and they're coming at us, and in some cases, they're frenemies, in some cases, they're friends, in some cases, they're ready to destroy us. As my creative director pointed out, we'll continue to be smaller, but in this approach, our guns are actually pointed towards them. And what are our guns? Our guns are focusing on the talent in the marketplace. And so we actually steal a lot of people from national pure play organizations. We give them a promise of a better culture, a better environment, locally owned, and we pay now in a competitive space, which we never did before. We got beat up by Google and Facebook, especially in a major metro like Atlanta, where they're going to have quite a bit of talent, or in Austin, just because it's cool as shit to live in Austin. And so we found that we obviously had to operate differently. And so we did kind of this concept of 2 for 1. You always have a bottom 3 sellers or advertising professionals in an organization, regardless how good you are. I ask you to probably get rid of them and only hire one more. That way you can hire one more as a unicorn, which I've done in a previous presentation, pay a lot more than we used to, and make sure that they're not only sellers, but we're balanced with what I call the other half that matters probably more these days than ever. Other presenters touched on it, and that is people that understand the business of advertising, not just sellers. So we really have distinctive teams that report up to me. That account manager, we're trying to go with a general title so that we don't have 47 titles, but our our account managers these days, heavy digital chops, preferably digital natives, and preferably come from a pure play company so that they can talk to metrics, et cetera, so that my sellers actually stay out and talk to clients. As many of you know that have run a large advertising organization in the digital space, once they get really good, they stop selling because now they're geeked out by their numbers and they spend all of their time arguing through metrics with their clients, which obviously is a scary model. So it's kind of where we sit today. From a local, that's about content. That's about the packages we sell. We really started going into the audience extension space, just like everyone, probably a little too much. I saw that bottom line start to be a little bit too big, both from a cost standpoint, right? The cost of sale on audience extension is considerably harder for me to stick with than the cost of sale on owned and operated properties. So yeah, that's a great wish. If you don't have enough content, then O&O is not a big enough sale in a local marketplace. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we've populated our audience. Obviously, we know that this is a pretty serious fight for us. So to become a digital organization by 2020, which is our goal, similar to what New York Times has done, there's a lot that has to happen between now and then. So we sold hundreds of millions of dollars of TV, radio, and newspaper. To convert those sellers into digital reps doesn't happen, right? Some of them will make it. Many of them have not. And so converting that large of a sales organization has been brutal, and it's been pretty tough work for about 5 years. I'd say where we've really been doing, we were talking about it long before that, obviously. I'd say the last 5 years it's been real work, and now it's just a normal commonplace where we talk about unicorns only, get rid of the dogs. And it sounds harsh, and it is harsh, and it's how we talk in public settings, and everyone knows it now. And you know who respects that the most? Talented people. And you hold on to talented people when that's the conversation we find. And we actually get that feedback quite a bit, that now we kind of stop with this old traditional model. We find that our digital best are staying around a lot more. So Now, my creative director did point out to the artist that this boat does look a little too much like high-end wood flooring, but I didn't have enough time for her to change it. So this local content model is an interesting one, and it took me about 90 days with my counterpart that leads content to make this happen. And what we've done is taken an editor, a younger, aspiring, aggressively journalistic editor, but who grew up digital native, who pays attention to every single story and how many graphs equal how many page views and what type of content equals page views. She has a staff of 10 people. They just slid under me. We give them the title of the revenue content team. They are not branded content. And they're not sponsorships only. However, they do fuel sponsorships. So what Jamie and her team does is they judge every article. That's a 10,000 page view article. That's a 47,000 page view article at a local marketplace. And they just produce constantly. And they are cranking out. And so what we get to do is we get kind of point that gun where we want it to populate. So if we decide, the easiest example, and you can see how this would work for a sponsorship model, is, okay, Masters. Our home base is Atlanta. We have a right to win in Masters content. People will come to us. They assume that we're going to be experts there. However, my editorial team's only going to write X amount of articles. She goes, negotiates with them, and she says, fine, I'll take the rest. It's a little painful conversation now that she reports to, Beelzebub, the ad guy, and so we have to be very cautious with this, and it cannot be, we cannot cross the line. It is still going to be journalism, and we are not going to tell her what articles to write, but she is going to populate travel in the Southeast, all kinds of tidbits around Masters. She's going to go to Austin and find any big PGA tournaments that are going to occur, any big PGA courses that people care about traveling, and so she slowly populates this content in all 4 markets. We get it big enough, and now we can sell $100,000 sponsorships against it. Again, it's not branded content, it's real news. She does not come to us and ask us our opinion on the articles, and she does not allow advertisers, obviously, to know exactly what she's going to write, but we've directed it, and we're growing local content substantially with that model, and so we no longer have to rely as much on an audience extension product in order to sell large, very specific contextual sponsorships. It's been a fun model, and I'll tell you, she's an amazing person in the way that she runs it. And her team, to think you have 28-year-old journalists who every day are bragging about their page views, and they've started to do media math now, which is really funny to watch journalists do as they start to apply ad units per story times a CPM to try to figure out what their daily worth is, which is a scary proposition, but they do it, and it feels good to have them all in like that. So I don't know if we're capitalizing on stormy waters or more of a glassy ocean, but we are creating content that is easy to sell against. I kind of set that up. But it is messy, right? Because our content is stolen constantly, like any of us in the business that we're in. But I just kind of mentioned how you take control of that and how you create content that your advertisers want to be around, but that's not bullshit content. And it's a fine line, but again, it's a pretty impressive weapon to have. And we go into spaces that we've never gone before. One of those spaces was, quite frankly, me taking that away from the newsroom without fear for my life. So one of the things that we get pressure from these days from our clients is that they feel as though on a sponsorship, we're giving them no guarantee of protection for articles. Obviously, the age-old journalistic issue of articles that are going to be completely inappropriate, they're going to be against their brand, that are not brand safe. And so this just sticks with that point. And we can show them models of how many page views are going to happen on this day, on this afternoon. And it really, really changes the content relationship with a client. It also changes the conversation with a seller and a client because they're no longer talking about the same old metrics, which has been incredibly helpful for us to get up the funnel a little bit with the type of advertising that we're taking out of the market. Obviously, we still have all the same tools that all of us do, and many of the vendors in this room and partners in this room, sorry for the crass term, give us a lot. We date, we don't marry when dealing with partners, but just to put it in perspective for you, our organization, we're at about 9% of our revenues are delivered programmatically, and I have not modeled for it to grow beyond that. I want it to stick around that 9-10% of all of our revenues. The rest is a form of direct sales. And for a local media company like us, the amount of RFPs that we get from national clients is down to, none, and so we can't rely on that either. And so this whole setup of local in a new and different way to make clients think differently it's truly our lifeblood, and it's a pretty big risk for us if we don't, because we've intentionally said we're not going to support ourselves on that national ad dollar any longer. We have a national team. They report to me, but they are really isolated from the rest of our sales force. They live out of our largest media buying ad agency that we brought in-house, so I had that kind of tough negotiation chops, but then we separate it from the rest of our business model. It's been pretty useful for us. That one's disturbing, I think. So, okay, Cox is an interesting organization. So we were founded in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. One newspaper. I think I'm probably getting this wrong, but I think we invested $7,000-ish to start that in the late 1800s. And Cox now is still family run, is not full of any public cash, and we are a $20 billion company today, and that's how it started. So there's a great it did for the organization. That being said, we're completely diversified out of that. The way Cox is set up is we are Cox Automotive, which is multiple brands, including Trader, KBB, Manheim, etc. Lots of data in that space these days if they've been acquiring large organizations that are full of research and data. The Cox Media Group, which is my organization, which is TV, radio, newspaper, and all of our digital assets. And then there's the Cox Cable division. So that's the three parts. Those other two are the big cash cows. Media is agile, but incredibly important to our kind of DNA as an organization. So it's an interesting one, but I say that because you have a CEO, he's my age, he's been named to take over at the top of the year, and Alex Taylor is a family member and has held about 20 jobs within Cox, including being a seller at the AJC, being a sales assistant, running cable. They really believe in that type of an approach to running an organization. We'll take over the CEO. He cares more about news than most people I've ever met. And he's got the cash to support us. So we can tend to move pretty quickly on investments. And right now we're focusing a lot on this storytelling concept of picking up brands such as, or starting brands rather, such as SEC. So where we're housed, we think we have a right to win. We can hire journalists that know that space incredibly well. Southeastern football is incredibly crazy fanatics, and we've populated that space and made a pretty big website, locally focused or regionally focused around SEC. We have because of where it's located, we also launched Dog Nation as well. That's also pretty successful. Large clients like a Hooters and a Texas Pete on the national side, and then as you can imagine, many regional players that care about those marketplaces. Hook'em I mentioned, which is in Austin, and then we'll go to the rest of the big 5 power conferences, and we will populate each of those and sell against that. So I still don't consider it a national model, but a larger regional model that makes sense based on storytelling. The real reason I like to talk about storytelling is we, like many of us, have started an agency in-house, and it's a true soup to nuts agency. It's not just a native lab, and it's not a content agency. But we started it through a woman who is a journalist in our organization who really went against the grain and built this herself internally, to the point where it was a pretty tough battle for her the last 3 years. And she's kind of turned into what I refer to as our Donald Draper, because it's amazing how she can turn a phrase in front of a client. And so she's now built about a 30-person agency. 20 of them sit in Palm Beach and 10 of them sit in Austin. And it's kind of an interesting place to grow up an agency. And people initially, myself included, are incredibly skeptical about how you could actually be getting agency dollars out of a marketplace as a newspaper in Palm Beach. Well, she's not. She's not a newspaper in Palm Beach. She's truly started this as a full service agency. So she steals from BBDO, We're obviously a friendlier place to work than they are at times. And so she finds areas that she can find people that are willing to live in Palm Beach. Well, something about Palm Beach is that when you are a New York City resident whose family has been going to the same area in Florida your whole life or for a couple generations, there's kind of a little Malcolm Gladwell thing that she does there where she finds these people, offers them great deals, and we've actually grown a true agency under her with talent that we let fly back to a similar situation. We partnership is because we think there's something about those two markets that we've been able to hire young, impressive talent, and they're willing to do incredibly good work. They get so far in advance of the sale, and in our world, right, in the advertising media world, there's not a direct translation. So media sellers are not all selling the agency. If I have 100 sellers, 105 sellers in Atlanta that report up to me, I bet there's 3 that are talented enough to actually understand how to get this dollar out of the market. But with those 3, if you go by the traditional agency model, that's actually quite a bit of sellers in a marketplace. Some of the biggest agencies only have 1 or 2 biz dev people, and we now have resources in multiple markets to start this conversation. It works best if we can get in at the very beginning. We're in with that will not occur for 11 years that we're pitching right now. Why I like that is I can report that that's truly new business. There is no question I did not switch any media buy that I was going to get because I won't even be thinking about buying media for another 5 or 6 years, but we'll be getting branded discussions. We'll be probably doing reports for their investors, and it's a different way to get cash out of the market for sure. I love that one. It'll be a couple $1 million growth agency this year for us. The people there are incredibly happy. We are now, I tend to fight this, but we are now building out the cool room with the fluorescent green cows and the sailfish on the walls and just all this design, literally a glass wall around them so they don't have to deal with scary media types. And they can create their own sheltered space. We do the same thing with our lab in Austin, and that tends to matter to them as well. Content is treasure. We will continue to spend a lot of cash to make sure that we do create the best content. That's really all I mean by this slide, but I think we're doing it at a speed that's probably about 3x of what we once were. Our organizations are still too big, and so we will continue to get smaller, but the people, the content producers, will be more like the model that I mentioned. They will take tests when they come to us. We will have 20 articles on there. If they cannot pick the articles that had the highest page view, they are often not hired unless they have some sort of other magic that we're willing to bet on. So we do that type of quiz to all of these people that join my revenue content team, and it's been a pretty good model so far. I'm actually kind of a kid in a candy shop about it. And behave like a pirate. I don't really know what that means, but it's a cool looking slide. But internally, it was a pretty rough battle for us. So in order to get an organization to completely change a 117-year-old model to go to this structural, functional model of revenue having just as big a voice at the table, not from a corporate standpoint, not advice giving, but actual daily operational execution, just as big of a voice as editorial or the audience team. In the newspaper business, the audience team would have been the old circulation team. It would have been the old production teams located in the TV radio model. Having that all roll up to us has been an amazing win for us, without a doubt. And that's my presentation. So, thanks, guys.
Cool. Do we have some questions for Eric? Anybody? I have a question. Do the other agencies mind when you rip off their personnel? Like if you...
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty aggressive, but you know, we've been the victim. I mean, we're large local organizations, right? So people have been taking our employees once we get them trained in the digital space for a very long time. And so it's just kinda,
payback.
It's just kind of having a reason to fight back. The last few years has been a big deal for us, and it looks different on our sales floors than it did before, in a great way.
In what way? More millennial? Like is it younger skewing?
Yeah, which obviously changes a lot. You know, you fight it for a while, and you still preach that people should actually come to work in the morning and still stay until evening, and then you slowly start to realize that you're the only one saying that, and know that they can actually be productive in different ways. And so even the basic cultural way we ran a sales floor has completely changed because of that.
Yeah.
And I was one of the staunchest critics at the beginning, from a hard work ethic type of a mentality. Mm-hmm. So even that's different.
I mean, it sounds like, I mean, you're already with the thing in Palm Beach and in Austin. That's kind of remote working too, right? So
yeah, and I'd say Atlanta and Austin are probably the most changed advertising organizations. So that's truly, it's digital first. They're at probably 70% of those large sales staffs, they're 70% IAB trained. They handle all media. They are a single seller. They walk out the door completely agnostic to keep digital chops in-house instead of doing the four-legged model, which is what a lot of traditional publishers would do. We no longer do a four-legged model, but we have several leads, which is really kind of stolen from the auto trader model, that are product specialists. And that's not a low-level support job. That's actually a pretty highly strategic job. They're actually some of our smartest brains. So we'll have a lead on native and content. We'll have a lead on search. We'll have a lead on extension products in general, and then a lead on more of an O&O sponsorship. And so you can bring them into the big pitches if you need to, if you as a seller are not great in any one of those areas. So you still have the benefit of someone being tip of the spear, but a single seller model, which has been cool.
Cool. Was there a culture? I mean, is there a little, like, explaining the more flexible workplace to your bosses? Are they okay with it?
Well, I'd say what's interesting with the model that we have is I don't have a boss that's ever been over advertising before. And so I don't get a lot of detailed question about that. It's really me that had the biggest issue with it. And it was my team members telling me to modernize.
A growth process for you.
It was a growth process for me. It's amazing. It's not like I fought it that hard, but that's noticeable when you have 25-year veterans who've made really good money for our organization for a bunch of years. It's hard to get them to understand why it's okay that the badass 30-year-old seller lives a different lifestyle than they do within the walls of our organization. So getting those different groups to all head the same direction was pretty rough.
Yeah. And by the way, I really liked the pirates, but I just want to note they are zombie pirates too.
Well,
right?
we had to go with it was the launch of Pirates of the Caribbean while they were building this too. So
yeah, pirates means zombie pirates now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely,
Can we give
guys.
them another hand? Thank you. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a little bit, but the premise of the panel is that, last few years everyone has been talking about branded content, native content, and it was all very, very appealing, of course, but then, it's turned out to be a little more complicated than people thought in many ways. So the title of the panel is, I believe it's, Do You Still Want to Be in the Agency Business? Brand Studios Revisited. So we will kind of get into that. I will first let my panelists introduce themselves and maybe just say a quick sentence about your organization and what you do there.
Sure. Hi, I'm Meredith Davis. I'm the Brand Partnerships Director at Nylon. We are an 18-year-old young women's fashion, beauty, and music publisher.
My name's Lexi Jarman, and I head up FT Squared, which is the Financial Times content studio. I've been with the FT for about 8 years and seen a huge amount of transformation. I don't think the FT needs any particular introduction, but I'm always astonished in the US how many people actually read it.
And Nick Yeager, Vice President for Politico Focus, which is Politico's brand studio and innovation incubator. We've been around for about 2 years, and our job is really looking to support and develop adjacent business models around the core business. So we're looking at things that are supportive. We're able to take our assets as a political publisher and build on top of advertising, events, and subscription. And how do we find new forms of revenue, things that we think can drive substantial growth in the company?
Cool. And I just want to say I love all these publications, so it's awesome that I get to be up here. I get there's a lot of different questions that I want to touch on, but the main thing is like we did discuss scale. What is and that's been one of the issues I think that is sort of that brand content studios have had to confront is the issue of scale. How is it a niche play, or are you is it a mass market thing, and how are advertisers approaching it when they deal with the issue of audience size and reach?
I mean, from our perspective, we struggle with this a little bit, to be honest. So as a publisher, we have our core isn't being a niche publisher, right? And we think about on a daily basis. We're talking about what's the relationship that our reader has with our content, and how do we smartly infuse a brand in so that we're adding value to that relationship, not just kind of just trying to do whatever the brand has, some metric that they released in an RFP or something that one of their folks, some idea they came up with as part of a media plan. So it's a challenge and it's a struggle. Internally, we also, at least at Politico, we have the challenge that we also have scale, right? So we do have decent, not huge, but we have pretty good scale right now, and it's never been more consequential to be in political publishing. And so there's a challenge there, because I think that's a shiny object. But at least for us, from a brand studio perspective, we look at it and say, how are we building products, teams, services that are adding to the value relationship between our reader and the content that we're producing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think I'd really agree with that, actually. I think, at the FT, the content studio isn't huge. We kind of think of ourselves as a neat little startup within quite an established business. We've actually made a really deliberate choice not to scale up our team internally. It's about hiring the right people and having the right people contribute to content, so specialists. Our audience is growing and growing, and our subscriber base is growing and growing, so making sure that we retain that integrity and quality to retain that audience is really why we're not just taking anything for commercial dollars. That's not what we're about. Our commercial business makes about as much money as our subscription business, so we have to be very careful about that balance.
I think a lot of brands come to Nylon because we have a unique editorial voice and we are a bit niche, but I think we also have that tone of accessibility. But I think the way that we kind of deal with the issue and question of scale is that we build in distribution rights into all of our talent contracts for content that we produce. And that really frees you of that issue, because you're giving the brand these assets that they can scale out and distribute in whichever way they want. So that's sort of how we've dealt with a lot of it. And of course, building in native social amplification as a line item into every program that we sell, so you're not just wedded to our own channels.
So they can take the assets, they belong to them, and they can go distribute them on social or whatever like that? Yeah,
primarily for the most part, of course, it's rights on their owned and operated properties and not necessarily like in perpetuity, but in some cases we're white labeling assets for brands to use for programmatic video or on social ads, that sort of thing. So that's a whole another layer of value that we bring.
Cool. How often do you work with other publishers on branded content campaigns, and are they equipped, do you find, to sort of cooperate? Does it ever happen? Does it never happen?
It happens for the FT. We definitely have partnered, especially where there's a complementary element. So typically TV. So very much the kind of mainstays of news media and television. That works very well for us. Particularly before we had scale in kind of video production, being able to leverage those visual assets to complement a text piece. I think where we have to be quite careful is that we're playing together to win together rather than trying to cannibalize each other's relationships and revenue. We've been quite lucky that everywhere that we've done that, we've actually won more business off the back of it. And I think it's about that strategic point where you go, do you know what, if I work with them, it's going to make it a much better experience for our user, and therefore we're going to see higher engagement and therefore better performance for the advertiser.
I mean, we don't do a ton of partnering with other publishers, to be honest. That's more just driven by opportunity, I think, than anything else. But I don't think the market's ready for it. My own personal opinion. I just don't think publishers have gotten there at this point. Content studios have been around for a little while. I think we're at a maturity point amongst brands where they've played the game for a little while. They've spread their money around. They've tested it. They've had a lot of pain. There's been a lot of pain around on the brand side around working with a publisher to produce great content. There's a lot of crap content that gets produced out of brand studios. There is. I mean, this is the truth. And so I think there's the 2.0, which is what we're getting into now, from the brand content side of things, is becoming better. Right? So the quality of content is getting better. We have not, as an industry, on the publisher side, I think really figured out how to cooperate and sell. Because I agree. I think if you do it properly and you pair and you partner up with a couple of people that are complementary, both from I think the ultimate result is better for the reader, it's better for the brand, it's better for the publishers. However, that is not, I don't think the industry is quite there just yet. I think we see a lot of people use content from our platform, right, and they distribute it on someone else's. It is not a great experience, generally speaking. So.
No, I would agree with that, actually. I mean, we don't do an absolute ton of it, but where we do, we are, as I say, being quite successful. I think, actually, and I'm always really wary of saying things like this on panels because I feel like someone's going to come in and shoot me from our PR team. But I think where the biggest challenge for us has been when we've worked, even if it's been successful between publishers, is the agency. Yeah. Playing us off against each other. Oh, well, they're going to do this. And, well, why aren't you doing that? And the rate's about 50% cheaper. And, it's so frustrating. And it is 100% about, their costs and making sure that they get the biggest bang for their buck and all of those things. But, unless you have a really strong relationship with the other publisher, yeah. And I think that's where we're seeing it working, because you're working together from the beginning, you've understood exactly what the objective is, and then you're not trying to just beat each other into the ground.
Yeah, we haven't necessarily dipped into partnering with publishers on content per se. I definitely think there's an opportunity in the event space, which of course branded content is born out of that. We've partnered with Twitter at South by Southwest, for example, and it's a great way to share expensive resources, but not yet on the content side.
Okay. And Nick, you mentioned, I think the word crap was used. So let's get
articulate.
Let's get into that. Hey, let's call things what they are. Do you think there's? I mean, naturally, you all do magnificent work. That is why you're here. But do you have a general sense that, like, out there, there is a lot. It seems like of really bad branded content, or there has been. Maybe it's gradually getting better. Like, not from you guys, but from the sort of the unwashed masses of branded studios.
I mean, look, I think that the industry is getting generally better in that, but that's not just because of the publishers. I think it's actually, I attribute a lot to the maturity of the brands and the agencies to some degree too. Agencies are stepping back, at least in our space. I caveat a lot of this with, we are a niche publisher, right? We are focused on a specific type of brand relationship. Advertisers, they run content with us because they're doing corporate reputation, they're doing visibility for their C-suite executives, they're doing issue advocacy around policy. So you can do great content. It's a lot easier. I mean, honestly, our job's a lot easier because we have a very distinct value proposition. We're not trying to play to a very large, broad audience in the brand, like a consumer marketing space. So in our arena specifically, politics, policy, I think the content's getting much better, generally speaking. That's because of maturity and consolidation of budgets around single campaigns. Instead of working with 5 publishers and giving everybody a couple of bucks, they're going, oh, no, let's go with one publisher, let's do an integrated campaign, do the full thing. And I'm seeing that maturity, and that's nice to see. It's a good trend.
Ooh, I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think it's getting a little bit worse. Where we are really seeing quite a lot of problems are where other publishers are accepting content for amplification. Oh, right. So the content when publishers are producing content, I agree. I think it is, broadly speaking, getting better. I think people are more articulate about what they want. They define their objectives much better. Some of the RFPs are still a little crap, but what can you do? And I think that client direct relationship is where we're really seeing a lot of really strong kind of understanding and maturity. But there's still so much amplification of content where clients believe that they're fantastic publishers, and some of them are, genuinely. I'm going to be really, like, my PR team, I'm waiting for them to come in like a SWAT team. They are going to kill
Someone's
me.
on the phone for you. They sound very angry. Linda?
You're fired. But yeah, I mean, I think that's still a huge problem across the industry, where people are saying, hey, here's this great piece of thought leadership from our CEO, and it's performed fantastically on our website. You're like, yeah, but no one's coming to the FT to read what's on your website. It's not the same experience. It's a terribly jarring experience when you're there to read quality content that you've paid $500 for, and you're getting to hear some kind of puff piece. It's just not a thing.
Well, I'm obviously coming from a very different space, but I think I'm going to play both sides of answering that question. I think quality has gotten better from brand studios in publishers. Yes, I do think that the process has become more streamlined. To Nick's point, I think that brands are looking to fewer and better partners as content partners. But where I do think that branded content, a type of branded content, has gotten weaker is in the influencer space. Nylon, we have an in-house influencer casting agency called the Socialite Collective. We have about 200 exclusive talents, and then access to a roster of 2,000 plus. Socialite was one of the first white glove, like full service influencer talent agencies. And we are known for creating great influencer content, one, because of the deep relationships that we have with the talent, and two, experience and actually applying insights to how we cast and match brands to talent via our insight dashboard, which allows us to look at all sorts of affinities between brands and influencer talents. That said, a lot of that process has become automated with actually I shouldn't probably call companies out, but brands are able now to just like plug in, like, I want a beauty influencer who will do a social post for $200, and this is exactly what I want them to say. And so you really lose the value of using that influencer if you're telling them exactly what to say, and the content that comes from that is not really engaging, not necessarily true to their voice, and it's just so transactional. You lose a lot of the, I think, premium and quality in that process.
And is that just because the brands just don't get what the value of influencers is, that you want that authentic voice? They're like trying to dictate to them?
It's a really difficult space, and I have this conversation almost every week, that it's an art and a science. You can't, yes, you want some guarantee of engagement. That's why when we cast, we use our dashboard insights to look at bloggers or influencers who are strong in the beauty category or strong in the fashion category, might have an affinity, say, to their fans and followers shop at Sephora because they're following them, that sort of thing. But we also look at, of course, their sponsored versus organic engagement. However, you then also want somebody who's going to be reliable to post on time, who has the sort of voice and content quality you're looking for. So it's very hard to kind of negotiate these things with an agency who is looking at everything on a bottom line and for efficiencies to say, like, yes, I understand that you want, say, like, regional diversity in your influencer casting list. However, an influencer in Minneapolis might not have the same access to tools of production to create the same kind of level of content. So maybe we should look at where, a massive influencer in New York, where their follower base is, and that's the regional play, that sort of thing. So it's just, trying to really make brands understand that it is both an art and a science, and you can't just transact on engagement.
Yeah, I think it's a frustration for us as well. I think, to use the horrible term, native. But, you know, I mean, I don't think brands are using our experience enough. I mean, in many cases they are, but that consultative, you know what's going to work with your audience. And I think sometimes they're so focused on it being their authentic voice that they forget the platform, and it does just kind of, you know, it does just become something that they could just do by themselves, and they're effectively just leveraging your brand, which shouldn't be what content is about. It should be about storytelling, and that we often use that art and science thing as well. We have so much data that it's, you know, we really do know, you know, we're not just saying, oh, do this or do that. It's like, actually, we're coming at it from this is going to be so much more positive for you.
I mean, I think you're seeing a breakdown at the brand level, though. There are brands that they made their investment, they made their bet a few years ago. They said, well, we're going to build a newsroom. And that's great. I mean, and some of them are doing exceptional jobs. Some of them aren't. Even if they do newsrooms and they have their own content teams, being able to translate that down to your audience is just, that is the art of it. And I think, I don't know, I have an optimistic perspective on it, I guess. I kind of have to, that we're going to get there over time. I do worry about the amplification business. We fight that. Like, honestly, we fight that pretty hard, and we label it differently. So that's one of the tactics we use. Is like, if you want to work with our studio and you want to run like an amplification program versus a actual like brand content or brand journalism program, like, we're going to label that differently, because we're not going to put our name out on that, and we will own ours, and that should give you a halo effect. It's a work in progress over time, but.
On returning to the topic of quality, obviously when the brands think that they're awesome publishers that can present some problems, that you're seeing a lot of the same ideas, and I guess you would have to hear about this secondhand through brands, like about their conversations with other publishers. Does that ever get back to you?
I would say that we get a lot of feedback that, you know, our partners love working with us because they're like, Nylon, you really understood our manifesto. You really brought us something interesting from this brief. It doesn't feel like something that like was sitting on a shelf and you handed over to us. So I can't say directly, but it seems like indirectly that that is a pain point with agencies and brands.
I mean, I would just say creatively, there's not a finite number of ideas, but generally speaking, you put a lot of smart people in brand studios that are going to be creatives. They're going to be, you know, hopefully they're doing a great job in creating content that makes sense. And if we're all working at the same RFP, there's a general, like, a finite number of ideas that are going to get recycled. So, but I don't know. I'm actually not worried about that. If publishers are fighting on the creative idea, you are losing this battle. You are absolutely going to lose long term. You're making a huge mistake. The creative idea is not how you're winning this, right? That's the agency trap that agencies put themselves in, and that's a horrible place to be. If we win on audience and we win on value, in terms of like the relationship we're building between the brand and the audience through storytelling, okay, that's different. And I think you can win. I think there's enough diversity there. And when I look at it from that perspective, there's not a lot of recycling.
Sorry, just to jump back in on that. I think that also comes back to the point that we were talking about earlier about how important it is that brands remember that they're coming to you for a piece of branded content because they want your editorial voice. So I don't think you necessarily need to fight with other publishers over creative ideas, because even if, say, Nylon and Who What Wear came up with a similar concept for an idea for a program that makes sense for the brief that we were both presented, the way that we're going to execute on that is going to be very different, but play well together within one campaign. So I think there's a way to do similar concepts but have great different results.
I think I'm going to take a positive perspective for a change. That's nice, isn't it? But you know, I think where we're really seeing quite strong wins around the passion when you're pitching in person. It's absolutely crucial. I don't think you can really get across how strongly you feel about the idea in a PowerPoint that's 10 slides or less, and certainly not in a spreadsheet. We have talked some brands into some very funny executions, and unexpected. And, I've been traveling quite a lot, I was saying to someone earlier, and going around and showcasing some of the work that we've been doing, people are sitting there and they're like, this doesn't feel like the FT, but it's still that strong storytelling vibe that we have, which is great. And then just because I can't be too positive, I'm going to say that I think within publishers, some publishers, which I'm not going to call out, they're recycling ideas within themselves. So if you look at craftsmanship is one of my favorite examples. I can't tell you how many briefs we get that say, we want to talk about craftsmanship. And you go, great, okay, cool. And they're all watch brands. Always. And when I see some of the industry stuff come out, this is what's new and launched this week, I feel like I've read it 20 times before within that same publisher's website. Yes, I think amongst different publishers, there's always an executional difference, the tone of voice. But when you've got the same publisher winning almost identical briefs for watches that you can barely tell apart unless you're an incredibly passionate watch fan, I really do feel like there is a lot of repetition.
And I also think, to that point, I think we sometimes get afraid to really go there with an idea, and everyone has their safer concept that they think maybe ultimately the brand really wants, and maybe that's why that kind of comes across as being duplicative work. But that said, and this is where someone might kill me, we've had to wrap our head around this quite a bit, because Nylon is known for being very edgy and, having such a strong point of view that sometimes we've gotten feedback that we've gone too far with a concept. So in reaction to that, we for a time were kind of coming up with an idea for us and an idea for them. And, in every brainstorm, we're like, okay, we love this idea, and excuse me, but we're like, but what's the basic bitch idea? Because that's what they're gonna buy. So that was, something that was bandied about a lot in brainstorms. And then I got to a point where I was like, I've now banned that term from all of our brainstorms personally, because I'm like, if we can't stand behind an idea, I feel that it's disingenuous in the execution. So I don't know if that directly ties into your question, but I think, it's for us, we're like, how can we reconcile ourselves with the mainstream and still have a product that we're proud of at the end of the day?
Cool. How much of this involves, how much of your work involves agencies, and have they shown themselves to be sort of adaptable in dealing with, a situation where, for example, they might not be in the driver's seat so much, but they're more in the passenger seat, or they're more an adjunct, or do they take the lead frequently?
I mean, it runs the gamut. I don't it's a tough spot to be in to answer that question. In the sense that I think they have the best of intentions. This is a nice way to say it. But it's tough. It's not. I mean, it's an odd space for them to be in, right? And they're to the best of their abilities showing value, right? Trying to be the responsible manager of a client's budget. The ones where it's working really well for us are the ones where they say, look, here's our role. We're going to play, these 2 or 3 parts in this program, but we're going to let you guys get together and just run with it, because we're going to step out of the way. And I think those agencies are being a lot more successful right now. And they're also, by the way, they're getting the larger programs, bigger budgets, the content's better, the results are better. So, and the biggest thing is the headaches are a lot less, right? Cooks in the kitchen. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of both. I think there's a point where pushing emails across everyone's desk doesn't make any sense for anybody. For us, the way the process has worked best is we generally have more kind of siloed conversations and relationships between the client and the agency, pre-sale, but then post-sale, we make sure that there's an email thread with every single person on it. The kickoff call has the clients and the agencies on them, because I think most agencies, and to your point, good agencies, they understand that their clients should be wrapped into everything going on post-sale. And, and then again, you of course keep like media conversations separate from the client.
Lexi, you don't want to say something really negative about, maybe you can call out a specific agency that you
I feel
hate?
like I'm being pigeonholed here.
Let's all name the agency we hate the most. Okay, no, I'm
I
just kidding.
love agencies. I think they're the absolute best.
No, I'm not going to take us there. Do you think, are there any sort of strategic uses for branded content that like clients haven't even thought about that you can, like a sort of, like Meredith, you were talking about like using it for secondary targets. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, I guess what we were talking about is what I have to think about how I'm going to talk about. The way we particularly work with a lot of beauty brands, for instance, and the way that I'm kind of seeing branding, new products rolling out, a lot of times brands are testing new, like, here's a for instance, Rimmel is rebranding. They're getting away from the whole London look thing, and their new tagline is edge your look. So the first phase for a beauty brand for like testing a new full rebrand is on their own and operated social properties. That's kind of where they create a lot of content for social. They see if that it's resonating with their existing audience, and then they kind of go into phase two. They want to amplify the content that they've already made, and with like scale partners and tried and true partners. And then kind of phase three, that content's old and they're looking at new partners to potentially create new content. And this is where I think what you were getting at comes into play, is that brands are now realizing that yes, they have their core target audience, so it's their loyal fan, say, for someone like Rimmel, but they understand that there's a secondary audience that they're maybe not reaching, and that they don't have the resources to put like a full creative budget behind to create, say, a television commercial or a really amazing video for social on. So there's that opportunity to be an efficiency play as a creative partner to help them reach secondary audiences that they might not have the budget to reach on their own with their own creative.
Yeah, that's cool. I hadn't heard about that. That's interesting.
It was something we did a lot. I worked at Bloomberg for 4 years, and something that actually we did a lot there. So, for instance, was Pepsi. Obviously, the majority of their marketing dollars are consumer facing, but they have all of these great sustainability initiatives and things that they're doing globally that they also wanted support on. So when I was at Bloomberg, one of the things is we worked with Pepsi to create a commercial that spoke specifically to the IR community. So you can kind of like take that and apply it to beauty, fashion, whichever realm you're in.
Cool. Are there any occasions? Have there been occasions where like a client, there's like a prospective client wants to do something, and you just have to be like, no, it's just like not just an argument over creative, but like, no, you're not really suitable for this space. Like it's not going to work out. You have to like wave them off, basically.
Yes. Yes. I mean, we've in our space we have a couple areas where look, if you're trying to reach political influencers, there's plenty of issues, plenty of hot button topics that you're just not going to want people talking about, building content on. So we just simply won't participate at a certain level. Political campaigns is an interesting one for us. We had to figure out how to navigate that this year, because we had never done branded content in the political campaign. It actually hadn't been done at all before. I think there was like one campaign for the Romney campaign, like 2012, that was done by BuzzFeed, and that was it. We got into it this year, but we had to draw the line, and we won't actually make the content for you. Like, you guys have to supply us the content. We had to go with more of it. It was this quasi-amplification play where the words are yours, and we're going to label this like very differently. We'll supply you the creative. But there are, probably a couple of times a year, I think 3-4 times a year, we'll get someone coming in that is just their stand on topic is something we can't be part of that.
Unsurprisingly, I also agree. We say no quite a lot, and it's. I don't enjoy it. It's not always the nicest conversation that I get to have in the week, and it's almost always me, which is always wonderful.
Maybe they know you're good at it.
Yeah, I mean, I am quite good at saying no. It's true. It's tricky, especially when it's a client and they really believe it. They really believe it's the right approach. And then you see it pop up somewhere else, and you kind of go, God, I'm so glad I said no to that. That was totally worth it. Yeah, it's tricky. It's not just around sensitive issues, it's around, there's a whole variety of things that the FT just won't touch, even from an advertising perspective. You know, there are other ways and means that we can help them out, but yeah, it's pretty much, I do spend a reasonable amount of my day just going, how about if we look at it in this way?
For us, it's coming from PR firms, actually. So PR is really trying to get into the branded space. And so they're like, will you write this article for us? I have a very small amount of money. And then they're not going to support it with media. And it doesn't make sense, because it's like, you know, if I do like a social post for you, or I write an article for you, and we don't promote it or support it, it's not good for the brand or us.
This comes down to salesmanship, though, too. Like we have an amazing sales team, and it is the rare occasion that it comes all the way down to our team to actually start to execute and provide concepts, things like. If these guys are screening it out way ahead of time, for the most part. I mean, it may happen at times, especially when we want to try to push the envelope with like new types of clients, new types of markets, and things like that. But it's usually screened out ahead of time. Like if you have a great sales team, they should be catching this stuff before it gets to your desk. Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree, and I'm sure that there's a huge amount of stuff that I don't even see, which is great. But you know, I think it's quite a lot of the time it's where they've kind of almost been sold a dummy. You know, someone's come in and said, we want to do this, and then actually at some point in that conversation between when it's gone through the salesperson or the agency or the PR team, and it's, you know, one of my guys has gone, this feels a little bit funny. And I'm like, yeah, it is. That's why. Yeah, I agree though.
And the last question, then we'll turn it over for questions from the audience, is on the question of editorial involvement. Like that's it's always been sort of a big topic. How does it work in your organization? Is it do they have a consultative role? Are they totally involved? Are they completely not involved? How does it work?
So on our brand studio team, they're not involved at all. But what we did, we were late to the market in terms of launching a brand studio. And that was very purposeful by the company. They did not want to get into the space right away. And when I came on board to help found this 2 years ago, we spent the first 6 months, first off, we brought on a journalist as a counterpart. So I had an editor-publisher sort of relationship within the brand studio. But we spent 6 months just digging into the value proposition and basically reverse engineering our editorial value proposition, and then building that into a very not strict, but it's a framework that allows us to execute at a very high level and to honor the type of relationship that our reader has with our editorial content. And if we're not doing that, like, we knew we were going to fail. So that was the starting point. Now, when it comes to large programs, that we may want to start a new franchise or come up with some like big massive program that's going to run 6 months or a year, we will work with editorial. We've built a relationship with them where we can come to them, we can have an honest broker conversation about what their interests are, and if they want to get in and they want to do something, then we'll step back, right? But we know right away that there's a line there, and the moment you get the editorial team involved, it's hands off, right? You're into an underwriting relationship at that point, and brand content will support that in every which way we can, as aggressively as we can. But we're stepping back, and that has happened. I mean, we've worked on 7-figure deals where we had an entire series we're building up, and we brought it to Ed. It was like, this actually could be really cool for you guys, and they go, we really want to do it. It's like, all right, well, we'll just kind of take a step back for a little bit, and we'll get a third of the deal that we were going to get before. But it's okay because we're doing right by the client, and I think that gets to your kind of scale question of, do you want to be in a brand studio business anymore? I don't view it as, at least in our business, it's never going to be, the 60, 70, 80% of our revenue that we see some of our competitors in the market doing. And that's great. If they can do that, I think that's awesome. For us, we look at it as it is one of, 5 or 6 really well-articulated bullets that we can fire for a client, and we're doing our best work when we can integrate it, and then in honoring that newsroom relationship.
Yeah, I mean, the FT is not dissimilar. We have a very church and state divide, as I think is quite well known in the market. I personally, the team that we work on it has both strings to our bow. So we direct editorial partnerships as well as branded content partnerships, which is fantastic. Although our editorial team will never work on branded content, and that's great and fine, and there should be that, and I completely believe it. We use a lot of former FT journalists to make sure that we have the tone, they understand how to write for our audience, and we have a content creation team who come from all across the industry, but all with journalistic backgrounds, so that's super important to us. Where we do come together, aside from kind of, making sure that we've got something full end of the funnel, is actually utilizing the data tools. Yes. So making sure that we benchmark all of our branded content against editorial, because it's really, for us, we are playing in that space of that quality. So that's incredibly important, and actually it's something that the market really responds to. The idea that you believe enough in the quality of the output that you are willing to say, do you know what, this is as good as FT content, it's a great thing to go out and be able to say. But yeah, we use a lot of data in our kind of ideation process. So understanding what our audience are reading, when, where, what device, format, combination, and that's the exact same stuff that our editorial team use. So it's really, really important to us to be able to retain that church and state divide when it comes to actually the output, but utilize and share kind of the wealth of knowledge that we have within the business.
At Nylon, we do have a dedicated editor who works on all of our branded content. However, he also is an editor. However, this has become, our studio's business is exploding. It's kind of an all hands on deck approach, to be honest. And it also really depends on the project. We just worked on a huge 360 campaign with Kat Von D Cosmetics, and our beauty editor on the print side, this was a digitally led campaign, has a fantastic relationship with the brand. So we had her involved in as much as possible. So it really is kind of, I would say, case by case, but we like to have them inform the conversation, and the end result is possible. It's also fun when everyone kind of has skin in the game. Our editors are getting things where using them as influencers, and the benefit to them is that they can build up their own personal cult of personality on social if we're promoting them doing that sort of thing. So it's all hands on deck at Nylon, I'd say.
Cool. I want the cult of personality. Great conversation. Thank you so much. Let's give them a big hand. Thank you. And should we do questions, Ross?
Yeah, we can do questions. You got one on the front here? I've also got a couple myself, but I'll let you go first. Please tell us who you are and where you work.
Hi, Mark Bloom with Sherman's Travel Media. I guess my question is for all of you. It's really around pricing strategy and then metrics in terms of deliverability for the clients. So in terms of your pricing strategies, is it the content that's priced separately from amplification? Is it all wrapped up together as one package? And then in terms of the deliverability for the clients, what are the metrics that you're guaranteeing or delivering against?
I think that's a lot of the place where agencies come into play, and honestly how they want to see it packaged. I think agencies now have a stomach for seeing production on a media plan, which is great, because you don't have to bury all those costs and show, an efficiency in eCPM that's efficient, including production, which is kind of impossible when you're executing really complicated, expensive things. I think more and more brands and agencies are moving to like a CPV or a cost per engagement model for sure. But some of them, I mean, most in my case, it's a true branding play. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
I agree with that, Meredith. I think it does depend on how you're being asked to respond. Typically, we try to package everything up because we use a proportion of the overall spend and reinvest that into paid media in terms of outreach. So that's quite important to us. We can be relatively transparent, but I think where we try and go when we're asked to break stuff out is, here is an indicative split. Content is very expensive. Things don't always go to plan. I mean, we had a shoot, we were doing an underwater shoot and a storm was coming in. We had 20 minutes to shoot it and it was a disaster. So we had to go back. So that's not the client's fault. We're not going to charge them for it. But, you know, if you have to break everything out to the nth degree, it can restrict your ability to kind of negate those instances where things aren't as great. Or if you suddenly find that once you've pitched and you go in and you do your research, and actually you follow a story to somewhere you weren't expecting because it's the best story to tell, it gives you a lot more flexibility. And I think that's really the core for us, is it's all about really the story. In terms of engagement, I mean, it's hard. I mean, we still get people coming to us, they don't really have a clear idea of what their objectives are, or they have two completely competing objectives, and you think, God, how do you not see that those two things do not work together? So we try and drill down as much as possible. Where we leverage kind of our own data is that editorial benchmark, and I know that means it's hard for agencies to actually compare us to others. So we look at a lot of engagement metrics like scroll depth, active time on page, you know, page views per visit, loyal visits. So at the FT we look a lot at, you know, people, how often people are actually consuming media within our site anyway. So looking at those kinds of things is really important. But yeah, I mean, we don't guarantee anything, to part of your question. I think it's quite difficult to guarantee anything with content. You never really know how it's going to sit because nothing's really comparable, because it's always about the moment in time that you're releasing it. You know, you've got some obvious slam dunks with, you know, we did a piece with EY around Brexit. I mean, obviously that was going to perform incredibly well. It was during the week of the referendum, no question. But, you know, you could do one piece, you know, 6 months previous and then another piece 6 months hence, and it performed completely differently.
Yeah. So we're very similar in terms of, you know, how we're pricing with the bundle. I would say on the metric side as well. Like we're one of the things that we really try to work with clients on in terms of managing the expectations is, if we're doing our job well, we're also pushing the envelope all the time. At least in terms of like what the focus team does within Politico, our job is to be innovative too. Like we are trying to spin up test cases for new products and new ways of delivering content, and we're experimenting with entirely new formats for the company. There are no benchmarks against it. There are none, and we have to set that expectation up front. We do what we try to look at. We try to layer on top. Well, I shouldn't say we absolutely layer on top every time. Is we do a lot of like audience segmenting in targeting. So like, how can we show impact within a specific set of influencers that you really care about? So if you're a healthcare company, yes, you care that you delivered at some degree of scale. What you really care about is, can we show you in any way, shape, or form that you move the dial, right, with the top 100 healthcare influencers in the DC market? Okay, well, what we've done, we've spun up a research team, and so we have our own online proprietary community that we can actually do qualitative, we do quant, so we're bundling at a certain price point. We are bundling in those types of capabilities to do measurement. So on a measurement side, yes, there's the statistics, and I've heard this as a fairly ubiquitous trend, I think, amongst a lot of publishers, is how are you layering in, at when you can afford to, the research capability and kind of the proof points that go deeper into showing impact. And it's hard. We haven't figured it out how to scale that from a digital perspective, right, and from like a tools. But you can do it through research if it's done right.
Okay, well, I think we're actually out of time.
Yeah.
But Eric,
thank you again.
Panel, that was great. Thanks, guys, very much for this.
Thanks.
This is a
Thank you
terrific
so much.
session. Thank you. Okay, so we've arrived. So we might have moving. So give me a second. We'll start in a minute or so. We on? We are on. All right, awesome. Guys, I'm Ross Fadner, the Director of Event Programming here at MediaPost. I work with Steve Smith. We put these things on. I do most of the one-day shows that we do here at MediaPost. And I'm delighted to be here. I would like to invite my panelists here to introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with our wrap-up session. So, Craig, go ahead. Actually, wait, pardon me, guys. If you don't mind switching so that everyone knows who you are. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I'm Craig.
Yeah. Now we're all confused.
Bob Verico. I'm the co-founder, executive chair of Investing Channel. We're a consortium of 200 or so sites in the investing, institutional, financial professional space, all exclusive. We're a publishing group. Kind of started as an ad network. But over the years have evolved into this kind of publishing group where we connect audiences with brands, lots of data, tech, exclusive partnerships with all of our pubs. We reach about 27 million unique visitors a month, serve up 1 billion some odd impressions, and we also reach pretty much the full spectrum of financial advisors, institutional investors as well through data and various overlays. So I come from a different perspective maybe than many folks here, so hopefully some of the insights I share won't be too out there, but we'll see how it goes. But definitely we have to, what's important for us is trying to develop some consistency across all these disparate, fragmented pieces of inventory, which we covered, and we'll probably get into that a little bit and how we do that.
Definitely a theme.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Craig.
Great. I'm Craig Hagenbook. I'm with a company called Hanson. We are a digital agency based in Toledo, Ohio. Just for people who don't know the Midwest, it's like that far away from Detroit. I'm here in the capacity that our company has developed a tablet and mobile platform, news delivery platform for newspapers and even magazines. So I come even from a slightly different perspective than most people here, but
that's right. We have the buy side up here too.
Working very closely with publishers. So yeah, I appreciate having me up and being here.
Awesome. All right. So, folks, if you recall, we started the summit with a talk from John Avalon, and he said some powerful things about the importance of quality journalism and the role of fake news today. So I'd like to start by asking Bob, since you are a network of publisher sites, if you would talk to us a little bit about the importance here for your business in quality journalism. And then, do you feel like you're fighting fake news or less quality news in terms of your competitors? So you can take one and then the other.
Contrarian, right? So for us, so I look at it from a couple of perspectives, right? Let's just call fake news. Fake news comes from sources maybe that are a little more independent and aren't tied to the strict journalistic and attributes that others like FT and so on, right? So I think the whole democratization of media and content has made it much easier. The barriers to entry to produce and distribute and share content and news is, are very low. So when you start looking at our set of sites, we've democratized content, right? So we have lots of independent voices, bloggers that produce tons of content. I think somewhere around 1,200 to 1,500 pieces of content a day across our sites. Wow. And it becomes, it's very challenging, right? So sometimes a vanguard may not want to be associated with a certain section. Zero Hedge, I don't know if any of you know, is a very radical, he really brings forward lots of breaking stories, a whistleblower, and he's got 7 million, 6 million visitors that just love. He goes down as Tyler Durden, I think, was the Fight Club guy, right? And he's he's everybody in finance that really wants to be in the know follows him. I wouldn't say his news is fake news, but I don't think it's all sourced at the levels of others either. So I do think it's an issue. I think our readers, his readers, on some of the sites know that this is, shoot from the hip journalism, and he comes out with information that he feels is relevant and timely before he gets scoops constantly, and many of our guys do, and many of our expert writers do. So I do think it's an issue. I think brands do want to be associated with quality. I think fact-checking, I think I'm not a fan of kind of the rubber stamp that we talked about, of a third party qualifying the news as real. I think that's a challenge. So it's definitely an issue. I think there are some interesting things happening I can get to in the next round if you want, but on fact checking where a reader might surface that this could be fake news. And I think the biggest issue is then distribution. That's Facebook's big issue, is fake news being distributed and shared so much. So,
we'll get to a lot of that.
Yeah.
But for now, I'd like to ask our buy-side guy on the panel, what do you think is the role of advertisers in supporting quality journalism versus something like fake news or even pop news?
Yeah, I think most of our clients, human nature is kind of a lot like how branded act. And I think if you're like a cool person, you want to hang out with cool people, and you need to continue to do that to remain cool. I think a lot of our brands, certainly they can be enticed to, be on platforms where there's, cat videos, and that's, kind of cool because there's lots of eyeballs on it. But at some time, they're going to water down the authenticity of their brand by associating themselves with things that aren't really, correlate to their kind of, their brand essence. So I think most advertisers are smart enough to realize, like, hey, there might be some opportunities to get a lot of eye. If you're a quirky brand, maybe you should be associated with quirky content. But if you're a tried and true, a financial institution that's been in banking for 100 years, you should be associated with like-minded content. I mean, I think that's just human nature.
Yeah, and somewhat common sense, right? But Bob just mentioned that he didn't agree with the assertion that maybe we need a real metric for from a third party that rubber stamps quality journalism. What do you think the sort of advertiser perspective would be on something like that from buy side?
It certainly couldn't hurt. I think having a third party opinion is just kind of, as Mr. Avalon said yesterday, kind of having a watch the watchkeeper is always a safe move. So from an advertiser perspective, I think that it doesn't. I'm not opposed to anything about having third. I guess you got to validate the third parties even. You got to have the fourth party to oversee the third party, and
and round we go, right?
So
a third party is really a fact checker, right?
Yep.
And I think what has to happen is sources, need to be. Things need to be sourced. I mean, a lot of fake news is not sourced, right? And that's okay, because sometimes you lose that. I mean, listen, I think the internet was started so people can spew. The problem is where are the standards? It's so easy to fake an audience, and those are the issues. So I think fact checking, sources. I mean, if it's supposed to be an interview, clips of the interview or research, but that's, I think, and then third-party fact-checking could be interesting, or automated fact-checking could be interesting.
Or even the duopoly that overhangs everything, checking, perhaps. I don't know, but let's get into the duopoly.
There's another piece of duopoly he's going to own, right?
So we had a really great panel on the duopoly. And I really enjoyed that one. It's about this sort of overhanging digital media, between two giant companies. So how is your company today living within the duopoly, Bob?
Listen, another contrarian, right? The duopoly, Facebook and Google, really has fueled, and we talked about this a little last night. They've really fueled our businesses, right? Many of our bikes, and I think we're going to talk separately. Do you want to talk now about kind of the header bidding and all that comes from Google?
It's coming up.
Another question.
Well, it's coming up, but
it's coming up. But listen, I think one of the biggest things about it is why have they been so successful? Why is, and it bleeds into they've established relationships, they've humanized their audiences, they've utilized data to understand what and why their audiences want, when, and how they want it delivered. And it's a clinic, in my opinion, in how to do business. Apple's done it as well. You could start expanding the duopoly to others like Apple's of the world and PayPal and the disruptors. They're disruptors, right, in a sense, but really all they've done is say, listen, we're going to provide people what people want, and we're going to humanize audiences and establish relationships, utilize data, and provide the best environment, whatever it may be. And that's something that we really embrace at Investing Channel, and I think every publisher has to embrace. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to serve up the right content. You're not going to be able to marry the right messages with the right audience and the right brand. If you don't understand who your audience is, which is humanizing. I'm seeing water. It's raining in here, actually. Did you see that just come down? Yeah. You're not going to be able to connect with your audience, and that's a big issue, in my opinion. And so the duopoly, in my opinion, we've learned from them. They've fueled all of our businesses, and I think we have to, and that came up yesterday somewhere, that I think we have to understand and take away some of what's made them successful and incorporate that into our businesses. So two pieces. One, they've done a lot to fuel our businesses. Two, why are they successful? And you can expand that to Apple and others, understanding audiences and
So, yeah, Craig, how are you leveraging for your clients?
I think as an advertiser, and I'm not on the ad side of our business, but I would say that, we work in the duopoly. We, spend a lot of money with Google and Facebook for our clients. I certainly think my only concern about, why there maybe should be a swing of a little bit balance back to I think they said yesterday, 60% are in those two networks and the other 40% is split amongst everybody else. I think a concern of mine of their massiveness is like, I see almost a lack of creativity going on. You're pretty limited to work within their platforms. They're fairly structured. So I think in looking at the alternatives from an agency side just gives you maybe a little bit of uniqueness so you can try different things. But they're doing great work. And I think that yesterday, I think one of the talking points was, we should be emulating them, or the other, tech company should be doing that. And I think that's that's a great thing.
Good.
Something came up, so this is kind of this roll-up of the themes, right? So look, and I kept lots of notes, but they don't produce content, quote unquote, right? That came up, and I thought that was observant. And I think the key is we, as publishers, have to really make sure we marry content with audience. And that's what we can do best, versus what they do, right? And I think that's going to require us to have lots of knowledge, data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, because this doesn't happen with account managers and people optimizing experiences. This only happens on the fly with machines. Once you identify the audience, once you understand their intent, you then have to deliver up the right messaging, be it content, advertising, whatever. And I think that's really, really critical for us to compete in our world of publishing.
Right.
I think it's critical.
Which brings me to the next point. So there was the point made that until context is valued in a quantifiable way, programmatic or audience targeting has to be the reigning solution. So that's kind of where we are today, right? But why isn't that the case today? Why isn't context valued do you think context is undervalued, and is being able to guarantee something like sales lift a part of the solution going forward? What do you think?
Me or Chris?
Go ahead, either of you.
So listen, I think I think context is extremely valuable. for us in my world. And I think it's different based on the sector. So, if you're on a windsurfing site and you're a financial advisor, and all of a sudden we serve up a very important ad about a particular ETF, or if you're an investor and we're talking to you about retirement, it just doesn't make sense, right? You're not going to get interrupted by that at that point. And I think context with it's really more for advertising, for messaging. So serving up the right message to the right person at the right time in our world is, and I think many others, is critical, because it becomes an extension of the experience, of the content experience, if it's done well. And with those kind of categories like finance, health, and others, serving up cerebral, kind of overused word, thought leadership messaging is very, very critical. When we target our audiences, and we know exactly, okay, we're going to serve this messaging to 70,000 financial advisors who have assets under management over 150 million, and who sell ETFs. When we know we have that audience, we then can craft the exact right message to that audience in context, and it's going to help them. As far as guaranteeing brand lift, I've been doing this since the 90s, and there's always been the question about guarantee. I don't agree with that at all. I do think that if you want to have a long-term relationship with a partner, an advertiser, you need to make sure you're reaching their KPIs and objectives, or you're going to get a one-time buy and that's it. So I don't believe in guaranteeing brand lift. The web has always been the one that's hold it to the fire and say, listen, you know what's happening, you can guarantee things. So we don't do that, but we do optimize and manage campaigns towards the objectives and try to hit them.
Right.
And I would concur with Bob that guaranteeing brand lift is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I think it's really about building long-term partnerships, and eventually you earn and garner trust, and I think that kind of solves itself. We're just doing good work, but I think I largely agree with Bob on that one. There's not, in terms of context, certainly context is great. You should always be contextually, targeting, putting people with the right messaging and context. But there are a couple. We do some automotive work, and there's some real general things like most people drive cars. So you can, throw a Chevy ad out there if you're on a windsurfing site, and that might work too, because so there are the instances where there are certain products and certain brands that have the ability to, not be entirely in context, but certainly it's a good thing for most of our clients. We
Right on. Okay, so let's move on to header bidding finally, right? So header bidding. So how has that helped your business in a quantifiable way? And does it bother you that the giants like Google are kind of in the background of that? And as one person put it to me once, throwing publishers a bone, like we're still in their world. So what do you think?
Well, listen, it's header bidding. Let's just talk about the concept of it first, and then we'll save the Google piece for a second, right? Header bidding it's so critical. It's a game changer. It's the whole concept of the King of the Hill game. Remember, it's for us, it's hugely important because we have such disparate inventory and audiences, and to be able to have advertising programs competing for that space based on the relevancy, the cookie, the audience, the contextual nature of the content of the inventory, the placement, how many, where it is in the ad stack as far as views, viewability, non-viewability, you name it, right? Is so critical, and there's no other way to do it other than the machine to manage it. So for us, it's been fantastic. When we started the company back in the day, there was nothing. Then we added a few of the individual programs, and you had to just pick the one that was going to maybe give you the best results. Okay, who's good for finance? Who's good for this? Who's good for that? And then you'd switch, and you could be very fickle, unfortunately, for those companies and for us. Header bidding has allowed that to dramatically change. I really think server-server is interesting. I don't personally believe it's going to happen, because at least in the near term, because the amount of intelligence that's lost from the publisher site on cookie and contents and relevance when it goes to the server side, I believe is too dramatic. So I feel like that might fizzle away. And the nice part about server-server is you can have 100 companies bidding for the inventory versus, publisher side, it's much less because of latency and all that. So it's been dramatic for us. It's been great, and we love header bidding across our inventory. As far as the Google thing, listen, Google has 90 some odd % of the inventory. The issue for those that may not know, with Google being tied to this, is now Google is, potentially Google had, by being the backbone to header bidding and also being the largest supplier of indirect inventory, programmatic inventory, Google had an edge. They had a first look at the inventory and then could filter everything down to the others, right? So they, X amount of time ago, they said, oh, we're not going to do a first look, and we're going to make it unbiased, and great, okay, hopefully that's the case, and I'm sure it is, right? So that's what's happening. So these exchange wrappers, what they are, and that Google has developed, they become very powerful, and it's the same thing. They're fueling the header bidding technology. So now Google is your ad server. They're the mediator. They're the auctioneer, right? And also, as I'm sure many of you have read, they're also going to determine what kind of ads we're going to block.
Yeah.
So Google has their hands in it pretty deeply, and we're okay with that. I just don't. I don't know of another company that has the wherewithal, knowledge, tech, resources to do it. And so we're personally fine with it, and I think it's effective as long as they don't get first look.
Yeah, so it's their world.
Big answer,
We're
sorry.
all living in it. So let's move on a little bit. So can either of you think of a good example of another business that you admire in this way, that they've done an extremely good job of tapping their audience data to reach their target audience in an authentic and effective way? Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, my agency, we do a lot of work with companies and building products, and for example, Owens Corning uses a lot of predictive analytics and weather to determine where high winds are going to be concentrated. And we basically deliver advertising for Owens Corning roof shingles to areas we know are going to be affected by high winds. So that's on the consumer-facing side, but on the back side, we're also intrinsically working very close with like Home Depot and Lowe's to make sure the inventory channels are there to support it. And then other advertising is going out to the whole professional contractor network, so they know that inventory levels of certain materials are going to be at certain stores. So, using data like that, simple as like wind speed affecting a supply chain is pretty cool. So, yeah, I mean, data's the new oil. So I agree with that. It's very important to most of our clients, and some of them are using it, in really creative ways.
Was it the Economist article that came out a few months ago that coined that phrase, "Data's the new oil"?
I think so.
Was it? Yeah.
I think it's been used here earlier, and yeah. So.
Anyway, anything to add there, Bob?
Oh yeah. I think Google and Facebook could. No, I'm just kidding. It is the new oil. It's the lifeblood. Data really allowed us to move from a kind of an ad network to this connector and publishing group. We've partnered with companies like Discovery Data, who in our space own all the FINRA and SEC registration data of every financial professional in the US, let's say, for now. meaning advisors, financial advisors, and insurance professionals. And that full data, it's mandatory, it's that they're registered, and then it's all enhanced with more profile persona information about what kind of vehicles do you invest in and so on. But when they register with the SEC, or they have to put in their assets under management, what they do. So we took that data. We exclusively partnered with Discovery, who are the biggest. We took that data and we worked with LiveRamp, and we did a cookie match against the emails, and we matched somewhere on any given moment, we're matching somewhere between 45 and 70% of that audience that we can find them on Investing Channel or on the exchanges, and we are then able to obviously target those advisors with 100% accuracy and scale. So what does that mean for us, for anyone, right? It's extremely accurate. The CPMs went from, let's say $15 to hit a composition group of advisors. Yeah, they're there. We know they're there from this, to, $50 to $150 to hit an advisor with accuracy. That's pretty dramatic, right? And even more. So it's really powerful, and we've taken that and enhanced it even further. That we now do research studies utilizing that data and finding out more about these folks and what they're looking for and what they're doing. So it's pretty impactful.
That's a great example. I'm wondering if further down the pipe, it'll get even better because So let's talk a little bit about the future. This is my last question. So AI and machine learning, they're on everybody's lips these days. They're certainly going to help publishers disseminate predictive content and then as well as predictive advertising. So is this possibly the solution publishers need to fix this whole quality audience context kind of conundrum that we've been talking about today? What do you guys think about that? Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I got a loss of words here. I'm trying to think about how.
Yeah, you can think about it.
I'll follow up because
Bob, go ahead.
I've got a story that's going to go long, so I'm
sick of
trying
hearing
to
the New York
reframe it
accent.
here. So
Let it marinate.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's. I'm not going to predict it's the Holy Grail, but it sure should be. There's no way a human. Let's just take the contra. Right? There's no way a human can serve up content that's relevant to the audience. One, two, audiences have a standard now where you serve me the wrong information, whatever it may be, you've really done a disservice, right? I think you're stupid. I think you're bad. You don't know me. You haven't humanized me, going back to what I said in the beginning.
It's a non-starter, right, for the audience.
I think so. And listen, Amazon and folks like that have set that standard, right? You go to Amazon, you search for, conference tables. You buy the conference table, and maybe they'll serve you ads for conference chairs. Unfortunately, a month later, they're still serving you ads for conference tables, even though you bought them. So I think we have a long way to go. On tying it all together, right? And it came up yesterday and somewhere in this cacophony of notes here, and I can't find it now, but the convergence of everything. If I'm searching for a conference table, I then go buy it somewhere, right? Something needs to know. Some divine intervention needs to know I bought that conference table and move on. So the only way this is ever going to happen is through tech and machine learning and AI. And so it is critical for serving up content to the right audience at the right time on the right device. I used to use a stupid example, like if a financial advisor is going 100 miles an hour on the 95 North Corridor in New York, Connecticut, at 7 o'clock at night, we need to know that that person is probably on a train, probably coming home from work, on what kind of device, on an iPad, on their phone, and be able to serve up the most appropriate information based on that mindset. And that's where I'm sure it's going. It has to go, and the only way to do it is through machine learning.
Right.
Yeah, and there's amazing things we have a healthcare client that is doing a beta right now with the IBM Watson platform. So what it's doing is if people are researching some of their content management sites, or their content marketing sites and reading articles about hypertension, the idea is that Watson is going to know, well, if you've had hypertension, chances are within the next 6 months to 2 years, you could experience the after effect of hypertension, which might be X. And then they start to deliver content based upon what those predictive, outcomes could be in healthcare. So, I mean, that's crazy. I mean,
That is crazy. Any privacy concerns there, or no? I don't know. Well, anyway.
It's not personally.
At least it's possible. Right. Yeah, right?
Yeah, at least it's possible. Right?
Well, all right, right on. So let's invite the audience to get involved here in some of the themes that we've talked about here at the Publisher Summit. If any of you have anything you'd like to comments or questions for the panel here, please let me know. Or let Eric know, because I can't get down there. Or, no? Everyone's good? All right.
We covered everything?
Covered everything comprehensively. That's great. Well, we should all drop the mic then. Well, all right. Well, then I think that's it from us.
Tony has a question.
Oh.
I can see it. I could tell.
Does Tony have a question? No?
It has to do with the golf.
Well, what day is it?
Has to do with the golf game.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Thank you all very, very much. I guess that's it for us at the Publishing Summit, right? This is going to close it out.
Actually, we're going to move to roundtables.
Well,
There's some roundtables.
Yeah, we're going to move to roundtables. But before we do that, big hand, please, for actually Steve Smith, who's not here anymore. He had to leave a little bit early today, but he put together a fantastic program. And big hand for all of you for being here. This is a terrific show, and of course to our sponsors as well. So thank you on behalf of Steve and everyone at MediaPost. And we'll see you at the next one in Austin in 6 months or so. All right, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
So we've geared up for roundtables. If y'all would like to stay and continue a chat, we're going to have 2 of them going on. The first one, Nick's going to moderate a branded content at business round side. And we're going to do staffing sales for 2018, way over at the far table on the far side.